He was the most electrifying performer the world has ever seen, an artist of almost supernatural talent, flawless, magical, a perfectionist. We saw the spectacle, the millions of fans, the record-shattering albums, the global adoration. We saw a man who seemed to defy gravity, a singer whose voice could touch both heaven and hell, and a dancer who moved with a precision that felt both inhuman and deeply, primally human. Michael Jackson was an icon built on a foundation of seemingly impossible perfection. His art was a grand, meticulously crafted illusion of effortlessness. But what if that perfection wasn't a choice? What if it wasn't just a personality trait or the mark of a gifted artist? What if it was something darker? He practiced us with a belt in his hand. If you missed a step, he would tear you up. The truth is, Michael Jackson's legendary perfectionism wasn't a gift. It was a scar. It was a survival mechanism forged in the fires of profound childhood trauma, an obsessive and desperate need for control born from a world where he had none. This is the story of how severe abuse and psychological pain created the king of pop, shaping every note he sang, every groundbreaking video he conceived, and every single flawless move he ever made. This is the trauma that built the king. Act 1. The forging of trauma, the wound that never healed. To understand the art, you have to understand the wound. The story begins not under the glittering lights of Hollywood, but in the smog-choked working-class city of Gary, Indiana, in a tiny two-bedroom house at 2300 Jackson Street. Here, Joseph and Catherine Jackson raised 9 children. From the outside, it was the picture of a striving American family, but inside those walls, a darker reality was taking shape. Joseph Jackson was a man haunted by his own failed ambitions, a former boxer and a blues musician whose dreams of stardom had evaporated. He saw in his children not a family to be nurtured, but a second chance, an opportunity to achieve the fame that had eluded him, and he would seize that opportunity with an iron fist. The Jackson 5 wasn't born of joyful familial harmony. It was forged under a regime of fear and relentless, grueling work. Jermaine Jackson recalled that their father wanted to keep them off the streets and away from gangs, making sure they were always busy with music. But this discipline quickly spiraled into something far more sinister. The rehearsals weren't suggestions, they were commands, enforced with terrifying consequences. For 5 hours a day after school, while other children played, the Jackson brothers were drilled. They weren't allowed to have friends over. They couldn't have slumber parties. Their world was confined to that small house and the relentless pursuit of musical precision. Michael, the youngest and most sensitive of the group, bore the brunt of this tyranny. In his own words, delivered decades later with a voice still trembling with the memory, he described a childhood ruled by terror. He practiced us with a belt in his hand. If you missed a step, he would tear you up. This wasn't an exaggeration. Other accounts detail the instruments of this discipline: belt buckles, electrical cords, or being forced to fetch a switch from a tree to be beaten with it. Michael recalled the constant threat, how his father's mere presence could induce a state of panic. He spoke of being so terrified that the sight of his father would sometimes make him physically sick, causing him to vomit. It was a cold and loveless environment. The children weren't allowed to call their father Dad. He was Joseph. Michael yearned for a father's affection, a simple hug, but it never came. He never felt love from him, he admitted. This physical and emotional abuse was a constant, grinding force that shaped his young psyche in profound ways. Psychological studies on adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, show that prolonged exposure to such abuse can lead to a condition known as complex trauma. Its hallmarks include chronic anxiety, hypervigilance, a deep-seated feeling of worthlessness, and a fundamental difficulty in trusting others. Michael Jackson's life would come to show all the signs. The abuse wasn't just physical, it was deeply psychological, targeting the core of his identity. When Michael, as a self-conscious teenager, began to worry about his appearance, his father didn't offer reassurance. Instead, Joe Jackson weaponized his son's insecurity, cruelly nicknaming him Big Nose. This constant criticism from the one person whose approval he craved most planted a seed of self-hatred that would blossom into a lifelong struggle with his own reflection. It created a core wound, a belief etched into his soul. He wasn't good enough. No matter how perfectly he sang or flawlessly he danced, it would never be enough to earn the love he desperately needed. This theft of a normal childhood fostered a powerful and enduring fantasy life. Deprived of the chance to simply be a kid, Michael began to identify deeply with Peter Pan, the boy who would never grow up. This wasn't just a whimsical fancy, it was a psychological retreat. He dreamed of a world free from the pain, fear, and crushing responsibility of his own. This longing would later manifest in its most extravagant form, Neverland Ranch, a sprawling fantasy world he built as a fortress against the traumatic memories of his past. It was a desperate attempt to create the childhood he never had. This foundation of trauma, the constant fear, the relentless pressure, and the feeling of inadequacy is the key to understanding everything that came next. It explains his almost pathological shyness, the deep-seated loneliness he would speak of for the rest of his life, and most importantly, it explains the obsessive, all-consuming drive for perfection. His entire artistic career would become an unconscious and later conscious effort to heal this wound. The stage and the studio would become his sanctuary, the only places where he, the terrified little boy from Gary, Indiana, could finally be in complete control. Act 2. Perfectionism as a shield. The trauma created a wound. Perfectionism became the shield. For Michael Jackson, the relentless pursuit of flawlessness wasn't just an artistic choice. It was a deeply ingrained coping mechanism. It was a way to impose order on the chaos of his inner world, a desperate attempt to build a self-image so perfect, so beloved, so dazzling that it might finally silence his father's voice and the echoes of his own inadequacy. This drive transformed him into a global phenomenon, but it was fueled by a psychological need that was both his greatest gift and his most profound burden. The Jackson 5. Survival through precision. You can see the pattern forming right from the beginning. On stage with his brothers, young Michael's electrifying presence was more than just raw talent, it was a manifestation of trauma-related hypervigilance. While the audience saw a charismatic child prodigy, they were also witnessing a boy whose every move was dictated by a primal fear of failure. He knew a single misstep or flubbed note could result in his father's wrath. This pressure wasn't about artistic expression, it was about survival. He learned early on that the only way to be safe was to be flawless. This early discipline, instilled through fear, became an internalized work ethic. The Motown machine, known for its own rigorous standards, only sharpened this instinct. He studied the greats, James Brown, Jackie Wilson, Fred Astaire, not just with admiration, but with an obsessive need to deconstruct their magic and reassemble it into something even better. He was driven by a relentless desire to outdo himself, to stand out, and to prove his worth in the only way he knew. As he transitioned into a solo artist, this drive took on a new dimension. It was no longer just about pleasing his father, it was about proving he could succeed without him. The album Off the Wall was his artistic declaration of independence. It was here, in his first major collaboration with producer Quincy Jones, that the world began to see the true depths of his obsessive artistry. Jones, a musical titan in his own right, quickly realized he was working with an artist of singular focus. Michael wasn't just a singer, he was a visionary who heard every part of the arrangement in his head. He was relentlessly meticulous. Even on a smash hit like Don't Stop Till You Get Enough, their creative process was a push and pull of obsessive detail. Jones recalled how Michael wanted to remove the string intro, feeling it messed up his groove. He refused, arguing it was the song's signature. That track would go on to win Michael his first solo Grammy, a testament to a creative partnership that thrived on this friction of perfectionistic ideals. But the drive was all Michael's. He never was satisfied with a merely good take. It had to be, in his words, extraordinary. The success of Off the Wall was immense, but for Michael, it only raised the stakes. It set a new, impossibly high bar that he would now feel compelled to surpass. Thriller, the apex of absolute control. If Off the Wall was his declaration of independence, Thriller was his conquest of the world, and it was achieved through a level of obsessive control that remains legendary in the music industry. The creation of Thriller was not a process of spontaneous creativity. It was an act of meticulous, painstaking construction with Michael as the master architect. The pressure was immense.
Michael's goal was deeply personal, to create something undeniable, an album where every song was a killer, smashing through racial barriers on MTV and redefining pop music. He poured every ounce of his being into this vision. The recording sessions were grueling. Engineers and musicians recall an artist who was quiet and polite, but unshakably demanding. Studio engineer Bruce Swedian noted that Michael would warm up with his coach for 2 hours straight before a vocal session and had always memorized every word the night before. This wasn't just professionalism, it was a need to eliminate any possibility of error. The quest for the perfect sound was obsessive. For Billie Jean, a song born from the dark paranoia of false accusations, Swedian mixed 91 different versions before Michael was satisfied. And the final choice? It was the second mix. They had gotten it almost perfect near the beginning, but Michael's compulsion demanded they exhaust every other possibility just to be certain. He would record vocal takes dozens of times for a single line, long after everyone else thought they had the perfect one. Quincy Jones described it as doing something over and over and over and over again until you get it right. This obsession extended to every facet of the project. The music video for Thriller wasn't just a promotional clip. Michael envisioned a short film that would revolutionize the medium. He sought out Hollywood director John Landis and insisted on a cinematic production that his own record label refused to fund, believing the album had already peaked. The result was a 14-minute masterpiece that didn't just break the color barrier on MTV, it sent the album's sales into the stratosphere. Perhaps the most iconic moment of this era, the Motown 25 performance of Billie Jean, perfectly captures this paradox of obsessive preparation and seeming spontaneity. While he famously improvised much of the dance, key elements, like the debut of the moonwalk, were meticulously planned. He rehearsed in his kitchen, but the raw, electrifying energy came from a lifetime of being on. In that moment, he was in his sanctuary, a world of his own creation where every beat, every step, every sequin on his glove was under his absolute control. It was the ultimate antidote to the powerlessness of his childhood.
The crushing weight of perfection. How do you follow the best-selling album of all time? For Michael Jackson, the answer was to try to be even more perfect. The 5 years between Thriller and Bad were defined by an almost suffocating self-imposed pressure. His perfectionism, once a shield, was now becoming a cage. In his own words, Michael explained the delay. A perfectionist has to take his time. He shapes and he molds and he sculpts that thing until it's perfect. He can't let it go before he's satisfied. If it's not right, you throw it away and do it over. He reportedly wrote over 60 songs for the album, recording dozens, only to whittle them down to the final 11. The process was agonizing. His partnership with Quincy Jones became strained, with Michael now desiring even greater creative autonomy. He was no longer just the star performer. He was the executive producer, the final arbiter of every sound. He sought out new producers to craft a sound that was tougher and edgier, a reflection of his new status as the undisputed king of pop.
but also a psychological armor against a world he increasingly saw as hostile. His work ethic became even more legendary, with workdays stretching 12 to 14 hours, combining grueling dance rehearsals with long nights in the studio. Bad was a colossal success by any normal standard, spawning 5 consecutive #1 singles. But in the shadow of Thriller, it was, in some circles, seen as a disappointment. For a perfectionist like Michael, this was a devastating blow. The very drive that had propelled him to unprecedented heights was now setting an impossible standard. The need for control, born from trauma, had created a monster of expectation that even he couldn't tame. Act 3. The Price of Perfection. The kingdom Michael Jackson built was dazzling, but the king inside was deeply isolated. The same obsessive perfectionism that fueled his genius also erected walls around him, compounding the loneliness and mistrust that were the bitter inheritance of his childhood. The shield of his art was incredibly effective at captivating the world, but it did little to heal the wound it was designed to protect. In many ways, it made the pain deeper, the isolation more profound, and the escape into fantasy more urgent. The price of perfection, it turned out, was a piece of his own humanity. The loneliness of the throne. Fame on the level Michael Jackson achieved is inherently isolating, but his was a solitude amplified by deep-seated trauma. The inability to trust, a direct result of his father's abuse, extended to his professional and personal life. He kept a notoriously small inner circle, and he had a habit of cutting people out of his life without explanation, unable to handle direct confrontation. This isolation was a vicious cycle. The more famous he became, the more he was treated as a product. Fans and the media projected their own fantasies onto him, creating an impossible standard of godlike perfection. This chasm between his public image and his private reality, the lonely, wounded man behind the mask, likely contributed to chronic anxiety and emotional dysregulation. He once described himself as one of the loneliest people in the world. It was a heartbreaking admission from a man adored by hundreds of millions. His perfectionism, meant to earn him love, had instead imprisoned him on a throne high above the world, admired by all, but truly known by none. The man in the mirror, a tormented reflection. The most visible and tragic price of his trauma was paid on his own face. The endless cycle of plastic surgeries was not, as many assumed, a simple act of vanity. Many psychological experts believe it was a clear manifestation of body dysmorphic disorder, or BDD. BDD is a severe mental health condition where a person obsesses over a perceived flaw in their appearance, often rooted in childhood abuse or teasing. For Michael, the seed was planted by his father's cruel nickname, Big Nose. That criticism became an internalized voice of self-hatred. He looked in the mirror and didn't see the world's biggest pop star. He saw the ugly, inadequate boy his father had told him he was. The surgeries were a desperate and misguided attempt to fix a psychological problem with a surgical scalpel. But for those with BDD, surgery rarely brings relief and often makes the obsession worse. His dermatologist, Dr. Arnie Klein, confirmed that Michael would become freakish if he saw a single line on his face. It was a battle he could never win, because the flaw wasn't on his face, it was in his past, a ghost that haunted his reflection. Neverland, the ultimate escape. As the pressures of fame and the darkness of his past became unbearable, Michael retreated further into a world of his own making. Neverland Ranch was the ultimate manifestation of this retreat. Named after the mythical island from his beloved Peter Pan story, it was a 2,700-acre fantasyland with an amusement park, a movie theater, and a zoo. On the surface, it was an eccentric billionaire's playground. Psychologically, it was a sanctuary, a desperate, large-scale attempt to reclaim the childhood that was stolen from him. Here, surrounded by innocence, children, animals, and whimsical attractions, he could momentarily escape the adult world that had caused him so much pain. It was a place where he could be the playful, carefree child he was never allowed to be. This desire to surround himself with childhood was, at its core, a trauma response. He was trying to heal himself by creating an environment completely opposite to the fear-filled, work-obsessed house in Gary, Indiana. However, this retreat into a childlike state had devastating consequences. It blurred the lines between adult and child, reality and fantasy, in a way the world couldn't understand. This led to complex relationships and eventually to the horrific child abuse allegations in 1993 and again in 2005. Although he was acquitted in the 2005 trial and the 1993 case was settled out of court without an admission of guilt, the accusations shattered his public persona. The sanctuary he had built to protect himself ultimately became the very thing that allowed the world to destroy him. Neverland, the symbol of his quest for lost innocence, became irrevocably tainted, a paradise lost. Conclusion. So how do we remember a king built on such a fractured foundation? To ignore the trauma is to miss the very essence of Michael Jackson's artistry. His story isn't a simple tragedy of fame and excess. It's a profound and complex study of how immense suffering can beget unparalleled genius. His psychological struggles weren't a footnote to his career. They were woven into the fabric of every song, every performance, and every innovation. The relentless pursuit of perfection, born from a desperate need to feel worthy, pushed him to revolutionize the music video, break down racial barriers, and create a body of work that defined a generation. The meticulous control he exerted in the studio was a direct response to the chaotic powerlessness of his youth. The fantasy worlds he built, on stage and at Neverland, were attempts to soothe a soul that never had the chance to be young. His art was his survival. It was the only way he knew how to channel the fear into something beautiful, powerful, and transcendent. But the shield was also a cage. The same drive that made him a legend also isolated him, fueled his struggles with his own identity, and left him vulnerable. He gave the world everything he had, creating music that brought joy to billions, but he could never quite find that same peace for himself. To understand Michael Jackson is to hold two conflicting truths at once: that his art was a product of immense suffering and that it brought immeasurable joy. His legacy is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, but also a haunting reminder of the cost of that resilience. The perfection he chased was an illusion, a beautiful, dazzling, and ultimately tragic mirage. But the music, born from that painful chase, is real, and it is forever. In the end, the boy who was never good enough for his father became the king of pop for the entire world, leaving behind a legacy as complex, brilliant, and heartbreaking as the man himself.